This is Rummy's Corner. As many of you watching already know, the Ring magazine recently published their entire archive online. It is an absolute treasure chest of boxing history. More than 100 years worth of issues, all readily available for any boxing fan to view and enjoy. They also have photographs and annual record books in the archive. And for our purposes here, we are going to begin with the 1958 Ring Record Book and Boxing Encyclopedia. In it, boxing historian Nat Fleischer presented his all-time top 10 rankings for each of the traditional 8 weight classes. And for this video, we're going to focus on his all-time heavyweight rankings. Just adding a little perspective here, this list was published in 1958 during the first reign of heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson, a few years after Rocky Marciano had his last fight, and about 4 years before Liston won the championship when he ended Patterson's second reign in the first round of their first fight. Fleischer was an authority on boxing history, the editor-in-chief of Ring magazine for 50 years, from its founding until his death in 1972. Looking at this list is fascinating stuff, especially for someone like me who has always enjoyed debates and discussions regarding the best heavyweight boxers of all time. Starting right at the top, Jack Johnson. An interesting choice, and one you will not see in the top spot of too many lists in a modern context, where indeed you may not see Jack Johnson listed at all while undergoing this type of exercise today. But looking closer, the entire list from top to bottom, most of these names would never receive mention inside the top 10 today. It's perfectly understandable, because since this time, we've had almost 70 more years of boxing history. But even in the context of 1958, if the internet and social media had existed back then, I have to imagine that you'd see a lot of laughing emotes where legions of younger perturbed fans would accuse Fleischer of being an old head. After all, 3 of the men listed in his top 5 won the championship way back in the 1890s, and the other 2 in 1908 and 1919. It's interesting to me that his top 2, Jack Johnson and James J. Jeffries, these were the 2 men included in the original fight of the century from the 1900s. That fight happened on the 4th of July, 1910, which would have been when Fleischer was a 22-year-old man, a good dozen years prior to Ring magazine's creation. Then he also had gentleman Jim Corbett and Bob Fitzsimmons in his top 5, and those 2 were involved in the first ever heavyweight championship contest captured and preserved on film. Back to Nat's list. The most baffling thing to me is Joe Louis at number 6? Inconceivable. I simply do not understand that at all. By this point in time, his career was over. Joe Louis was the heavyweight world champion from 1937 until 1949. And even though his reign spanned throughout the war years, he defended the championship 25 consecutive times. Some sources will even cite that number as 26, but 25 was the generally accepted number throughout most of my lifetime, regardless of the technicality with the 4-round war exhibition that was never intended to be a true title defense, regardless of the stance of the New York State Athletic Commission. Point here being, Joe Louis in any spot other than the top spot, it just feels wrong by any objective measure. No disrespect to Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey, or any of the pioneers on the left, but none of them belong ahead of the great Joe Louis. None of them. Side note, however, I like the inclusion of Sam Langford here. Langford is a towering legend in boxing history, unquestionably top 5 material in my humble opinion, but his career stretched so long across so many weight classes that it can be difficult to pin him down to any one weight class. But at this point in time, 1958, I quite like the inclusion of Langford here. Going back to the idea of Fleischer being viewed as a so-called old head back in 1958, the low ranking of Louis alone at least illustrates that, on a scale of old head nostalgia to young punk recency bias, It's safe to say Fleischer certainly erred on the side of nostalgia. Marciano and Lewis were the only two boxers in his top 10 list who had competed at the championship level in the past 10 years prior to the publication of his list. I think this also illustrates an important point we will see here, that true change in these types of things is slow and incremental, never radical. The test of time is an important consideration here, but at the same time, merit counts. And based on any objective merit, I'm not seeing a case here for anyone in the top spot here other than the great Joe Louis. Building on the test of time theme, Fleischer was clearly set in his ways, where newcomers on the scene were never going to be quick to impress him. In the 1971 issue of Ring magazine, Fleischer doubled down on his list from more than a dozen years earlier. He presented an identical list to the one he had first published in 1958. He actually tripled down because he had already doubled down back in 1968. But in 1971, a year prior to his passing, Fleischer penned an article, Clay in the all-time top 10? Definitely no. Granted, the article came out prior to the start of Ali's second reign, and Fleischer died well before some of Ali's most iconic accomplishments. This piece was published about 6 months after the other fight of the century, the first fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Fleischer's article could perhaps best be summed up from this excerpt, where he opined, the way Cassius Clay stands, he does not qualify for a rating with the greatest heavyweights of all time, nor, the way the future shapes up for him, is he likely to qualify. Wow, how about that? Fleischer wasn't exactly Quasimodo over there, but forgetting everything that Ali would eventually go on to accomplish in the years following Fleischer's death, I think he's being more than a bit harsh here. Indeed, even if Ali had retired then and there, I think he has a stronger case than most of those guys who appeared on Nat's list. Ali had 9 consecutive title defenses during his first reign, often beating challengers on their own home turf, and I do wonder if Fleischer was biased against Ali. Not only because he was disrespectfully referring to him as Clay years after he had changed his name, but because of the way he concluded the article, where he made a point to state that he did not admire Ali's stance on the United States and its armed forces. Interestingly, however, it's worth noting that Fleischer's Ring magazine continued recognizing Ali as heavyweight world champion, even during his exile, as Fleischer embraced the idea that championships can only be won and lost inside of the ring. And on that point, Fleischer and I are in strong agreement. Ali was not stripped of that distinction until he requested such, insisting he was retired. Moving along, Ring magazine published another top 10 all-time heavyweight list in the March 1975 issue, and this list is beginning to slowly evolve into something more recognizable, in terms of what we might expect a top 10 list to look like 51 years ago. Joe Louis is in the top spot, and in my opinion, he absolutely deserved to be there. But once again, you could kind of see that theme about the test of time, where change tends to be slow and incremental, never radical. In addition to the appreciation Louis experienced, the reputation of Dempsey, Marciano, and Tunney likewise appreciated, whereas Johnson, Jeffries, Fitz, and Gentleman Jim all depreciated. Langford and Schmeling are now excluded, and in their place at 9 and 10 respectively, we have Ali and Frazier. No doubt Fleischer's longtime commanding presence at Ring was influential in these newer rankings. But in terms of the test of time, we see a lot of the older pioneers dropping down in order, where strangely enough, they have Jeffries ahead of Johnson this time around, and Fitz and Jim are trending down. They nailed the adjustment with Joe Louis in the top spot, and then Dempsey, Marciano, and Tunney, all 4 of those heavyweight greats improved their standing here, illustrating that these names were becoming more solidified as true greats, withstanding the test of time right before our very eyes. And you see the same thing here in reverse, where Ali and Frazier are just making their debut on this type of list, with both of them right at the bottom. Moving along, in the 1998 holiday edition, Ring Magazine published their top 50 all-time heavyweight list. We're mainly going to focus on the top 10 here, but I do want to explore a handful of names outside of the top 10 too. Now, this top 10 list is looking more and more like something we might see today. It definitely has a more familiar all-around vibe, even if it still has some time-dependent oddities. Notice all the old pioneer guys who won championships in the 1890s? They're all gone. None to be seen here. No Gentleman Jim, no Fitz, and no Jeffries. Johnson and Dempsey still made the top 10, but both of them are now at the very bottom. Ali and Lewis at 1 and 2 has a modern feel, but then you have Holyfield at number 3, which feels off with a current day mindset. But at this time, you have to remember that Holyfield had joined Ali as the only 3-time heavyweight champion in history. Evander was coming off of back-to-back victories against Mike Tyson, and with only 3 career losses, he had not yet had his showdown with Lennox. Holyfield at 3 feels like, in this particular instance, they leaned more toward young Punk recency bias as opposed to old head nostalgia. Meanwhile, Foreman, Holmes, and Liston all debuted, and Marciano and Frazier were similarly placed compared to where they each were 23 years earlier when Ring did its last top 10 listing. For Dempsey and Marciano, we're seeing their legacies withstand the test of time, and we are especially seeing that type of thing with Joe Louis and now also Muhammad Ali, whereas Frazier is kind of settling in here as a bottom half guy too. So where are all those guys from Fleischer's 1958 list who are now absent here? Jeffries came in at number 12, 10 spots lower than where Fleischer had him in 58. Tunney landed at number 15, 7 spots lower than where Fleischer had him. Lankford landed at number 17, 10 spots lower than where Fleischer had him. Schmeling came in at number 19. Yet another one who was 10 spots lower than where Fleischer had him in 58. Fitzsimmons came in all the way down at number 24, 21 spots lower than where Fleischer had him. And Gentleman Jim was all the way down to number 34, a whopping 29 spots lower. The test of time is beginning to leave these guys out of the conversation altogether. The only one still close to the top 10 of those absent was Jeffries at number 12. And I think he probably has the best case of any of the heavyweights no longer recognized as the top 10. Now, a few things have been happening here. First and foremost, the simple passage of time. There were 40 years of new boxing history in the intervening time, and a lot of the so-called old heads who held these past greats in the highest esteem were no longer with us. But even there, certain names like Dempsey and Lewis and Marciano, they were slowly but surely becoming fixtures in these types of discussions. By this point in time, the pro-recency so-called young punks from 1958 were getting older and were followed by newer generations of young punk recency bias types. And each subsequent generation was getting older too, on an ever-sliding scale of young punk to old head evolution. But only the names of a select few all-time greats were surviving the immortal test of time. With Holyfield finishing third on the 1998 top 50 list, I think it's also worth noting how the other undisputed champions from the 1990s finished here. Iron Mike Tyson finished at number 14. Riddick Big Daddy Bo finished at number 23. And the great Lennox Lewis finished all the way down at number 32. But with Lennox, this was before he became undisputed, where some of his best work had yet to come. Buster Douglas was the other undisputed heavyweight champion during the 90s, and he did not land on Ring's top 50 in 1998. Without going through the entire list here, I personally think Douglas was more deserving of a top 50 spot than several boxers who did make the cut. Moving along, in 2005, boxing historian Bert Sugar released his top 10 list on an ESPN Classic Ringside special. Bert was previously owner and editor of Boxing Illustrated from 1969 until 1973, and he was also the Ring magazine editor and publisher from 1979 until 1983. This is what Bert's list looked like. And at quick glance, if we think back to the so-called old head arguments regarding Fleischer's list from way back in 1958, Bert's 2005 list kind of gives off a similar typed vibe. The only quasi-recent boxers on Bert's list are Foreman and Holmes, each of whom had fought within 10 years of Bert's list on ESPN, both of them ending their comeback years, effectively the second career for each heavyweight. Bert opted for Lewis over Ali, which is perfectly acceptable, and then he held guys like Johnson and Dempsey in higher esteem than Ring magazine had 7 years earlier. Gene Tunney managed his way back into the top 10 according to Sugar. And the only other notable difference here is the inclusion of Ezzard Charles, which I quite like honestly. I don't necessarily believe Ezzard belonged on a top 10 heavyweight list back in 2005, but I believe Ezzard gets repeatedly underrated and dismissed when it comes to discussions pertaining to the top 15 to 20 heavyweights of all time, especially back then. Incidentally, I actually got to meet Bert when I managed to land a press row seat for Vladimir's first defense against Calvin Brock. And I remember he had this small glass sitting on the table with cigars in it, this being several years after New York City banned indoor smoking. I was one seat over for him, and we exchanged a few nice words that evening. But what I honestly remember most is he looked very tired that night, almost a bit disinterested, like someone whose passion as a fan had long been dimming. Meanwhile, I was ecstatic, watching a heavyweight championship bout at Madison Square Garden that involved legendary trainer Emanuel Stewart and the newly crowned Klitschko going up against an undefeated challenger. Bert was from the old school, and his list definitely exuded more old head vibes than the Ring Top 50 in '98. Sugar went on to say that he'd have Holyfield at number 11 and Tyson at either number 14 or 15. And when it came to Lennox, Sugar inexplicably said he'd rank him at either number 19 or number 20. By this point in time, Lennox was retired. His career was over. And while Bert may not have been impressed by his career, I sure as hell was. And Bert placing Lennox Lewis outside the top 10 in 2005? It seems almost as bad as Fleischer having Joe Louis anywhere but the top spot back in 1958. This all amplifies the greater point that, when it comes to the evolution of top 10 heavyweights, change is slow and incremental, never radical. Guys like Bert Sugar and Nat Fleischer knew their boxing history, but at a certain point along the way, I think both of them got a little stuck in their ways. They say the music you listen to in your mid-20s is the music you'll listen to for the rest of your life. And I do wonder if that doesn't also ring true when it comes to ranking the top 10 heavyweights of all time. Let's take a look at one final top 10 list. This one is from the 2020 survey here on Rummy's Corner. Note that I did not personally participate in this survey, so my personal opinions have zero impact on the final tally here. The survey was conducted on Boxing Forum 24 in the Classics section, where 24 volunteers participated. And allow me to say, the collective knowledge of the individuals from that survey is simply extraordinary in my humble opinion. A vast wealth of knowledge over there. I think the results here are solid, and at the very least more representative of the type of top 10 list you might see today. Ali and Lewis in the top 2 spots makes perfect sense to me. And I think I tend to agree with the top 7 as a whole, even if I do think the ordering could be swapped around a bit here. When it comes to number 8 through number 15, give or take, I think this is where things get really tricky here, because I think the ordering of these spots are largely subjective, and with personal preference and individual taste figuring into these sorts of things, like I said, it gets tricky. Here are the extended results outside the top 10. Where basically, I think you could maybe make a case for swapping some of these names in place of Tyson and Holyfield. Specifically Vladimir, in my opinion. Vlad is a tricky proposition all around, in part because he suffers from change being slow and incremental, and also because he did not face the biggest challenge of his era, understandably so, being his big brother. This type of thing plagues Dempsey as well, with the Harry Wills fight never happening, and also a lot of the older pioneers we saw back on Fleischer's 58 list. In contrast, Joe Louis has no such lingering doubts. He is the gold standard of heavyweight champions, and all boxing champions regardless of weight. Back to the survey results from 6 years ago. If you compare that to Fleischer's list from 62 years earlier, only 3 names survived the test of time: Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, and Jack Johnson. Ali and Frazier and Foreman and Holmes, those guys all kind of settled in and solidified their mark as top 10 all-time heavyweights. Or at the very least, they have cemented themselves as legitimate parts of that discussion. Then with Lennox, Holyfield, and Iron Mike, it gets trickier because not as much time has passed since their careers ended. And with change being slow and incremental, one could maybe expect Vlad's reputation to appreciate with more time. And in the case of reigning heavyweight king Alexander Usyk, in my opinion, he probably isn't in the top 10, not just yet, but he too is certainly now a legit part of the discussion pertaining to the top 10. Or am I just some old head like Nat and Bert before me, unable or unwilling to see the true greatness unfolding right before me? I suppose only time will tell when future boxing historians make their case, when we can track the future evolution and see which names survive the test of time over this slow and incremental evolution. At the end of the day, I think it's also worth considering what specific criteria guys like Fleischer and Sugar and Ring Magazine, which criteria were they prioritizing when creating their rankings across these various years? The sport has changed a lot with the passage of time, and heavyweight boxing itself has changed a lot, in large part because over time heavyweight athletes have grown physically much bigger than they were in the past. Perhaps the slow and incremental change we are seeing here is all predicated on the Ring Magazine's institutional culture, with an inclination toward deference to the previous editors, where the criteria has always included some degree of subjective bias. For my take, I think late great Hall of Fame trainer Emanuel Stewart put it best when he said something to the effect that all we can ask of any champion is to consistently face the best in his era. I think that is the only way it should be done, as it helps account for the division's evolution with the changing times. On that basis alone, I am very hard-pressed to see anyone outside of Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali landing the top 2 spots based on any objective measure, and I think the two are largely interchangeable myself. In my experience, most tend to favor the overall better quality of Ali's resume, as opposed to the long reign of dominance celebrated by Louis. But either way, I think those two have to be in the top 2 spots. But even as I say those words, and truly believe them with all of my heart and soul, I likewise wonder if I'm not developing the same type of traits I've criticized in Fleischer and Sugar, those of an aging old head becoming stuck in his ways. I don't think I am, but they probably didn't either. In any case, I'm not quite 50 just yet, and I'd like to believe I've got a little bit of young punk left in me, just enough that I hope my evolving opinions are dead in the middle of the meter when it comes to old head nostalgia and young punk recency bias. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Corner.